So this is our virtual training and it will be recorded throughout the process and then it will be posted onto our YouTube channel. Afterwards, if you want that to be just a source that you can go back to and refresh your knowledge on this subject. And then after our training today, we are going to have tea time with Jose. And after that, I will send out our certificates of attendance just for anyone who is attending more than 70%. So that is going to be more than 45 minutes of the actual training, not including our tea time or any YouTube video viewings afterwards. It is just 45 minutes of the actual training, of the live training. And so please just feel free to unmute yourself throughout the training. If you guys have any questions, you are more than free to ask them at any point. So at this time, I'm just going to give it over to Jose, and he's going to share a word of encouragement with you guys.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks, everyone, for finding time to come through. It's been a great day. And hello, it's still a new year. So for whoever wasn't able to attend last week's meeting, Happy New Year. So yeah, today's word really is just to encourage us. We have a WhatsApp group for our first responders, and just last week we had a video being sent about firefighters being thrown rocks at, and there was really back and forth, firefighters really angry and feeling discouraged. And the worst bit about that scene is that the fire truck went and got stuck in a ditch. So you can imagine how frightened they were and how they were feeling down and like, hey, I mean, the community needs to love us, and here they are wanting to fight us. So I would want to encourage us. I would want to encourage us as first responders, as firefighters, not to relent, not to hate on our community, just to feel that we are a peculiar people. We're chosen by God to do this job. And usually what I say is, because we are chosen, we go where the need is. So don't feel downcasted. Don't feel like the community doesn't love you. You're out there to save life and property. And if you feel discouraged, you can always reach out to us. You can always reach out to us privately, and we can be able now to help you cope in that situation. So going forward, stay the course, continue practicing in the firehouse, and never feel out and downcasted. Okay, sawa. I hope you get encouraged with that. Back to you, Leah, as you introduce the speaker of the day.
Thank you, Jose. I always love hearing your words of encouragement. I know that they just encourage everyone that hears them. So we do thank you so much for doing that for us every week. But I do want to introduce Brian Anderson today. He's going to speak with us and just show us some trainings about fire science, and I believe the candle experiment. So we're excited to hear about that. So I give the floor to you, Brian.
Thanks, Leah. Oh, so now you can see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. It's missing the title slide for whatever reason, but all it says is we're going to learn about candle experiments today. In the virtual training in the past, had a lot of fire behavior training. I know Howard did basically 2 last month, and in November there was 1. So we're going to take it kind of to the next level and build off these previous ones that we had. There's more science and math involved. It shouldn't be too in-depth, but you guys will be able to handle it. But for those who don't know me, I should start by saying my name is Brian. I'm a volunteer firefighter for Velva, North Dakota. I've been in the fire service for 17 years probably. As a volunteer, career firefighter, I have a bachelor's and a master's in Homeland Security and Emergency Management. both my bachelor's degree and my master's degree are in the area of science. And that's because there is a lot of science that goes into firefighting. It's a lot more than just putting water on the fire. And I think today you'll start learning that that is true. So we'll start with this case study. And it's a simple house fire. When we are looking at this video, the flame is yellow, orange, and red, and the smoke doesn't have a lot of power behind it. Going back to Howard's class, what would we call that smoke? We call that laminar smoke. It's a gentle stream of smoke coming out. It doesn't have thick clouds in it. It's not black yet. So what we know with laminar smoke is that's probably just a room and content fire. That's coming through the front door. Knowing our building construction classes, there's a very good chance that is a living fire, and maybe a front building that takes on home design. We also know that this fire trying to
trouble hearing you over the sound of the house fire.
Okay, well that was kind of the end of the video anyways. So I'll just start over because I don't know what you heard. When the fire crews were coming to the scene, you could see that the flames were yellow and red coming out the front door and out of the windows a little bit. And the smoke was laminar smoke. When we go back to the art of reading smoke with Howard from last week, or last month, I mean, it was laminar smoke. It was just a steady color of smoke coming out in a steady stream. So what that tells us is it's a room and contents fire. That's an active fire that has oxygen. What happened when the firefighter kicked down that front door was he added a lot more oxygen. And we saw that firefighter, he kicked down the front door, then he went walking in. knowing building construction, more than likely what that room was when we go to our building construction classes was just a living room or something that was on fire. I don't like to criticize fire departments. I have no clue what fire department that was. He probably should have done a 360 and talked to the occupants outside to see if anyone was in there. But we saw he kicked down the door without his hand line ready, which added oxygen to the fire. And by the time they deployed that hand line, the fire grew very substantially. And by the end of the video, we saw that the smoke coming out was a thicker, more volatile smoke, which means it's transitioning from just a room and contents fire, probably to a structure fire. That's going to result in a lot more damage and maybe lose the house. So I'll go back to my slides now. So like I was saying, Thomas Jefferson is one of our founding fathers of our nation. He's considered a great president probably by most historians. He just was all around a good guy. He's famous for saying all men are created equal. He wrote our Constitution. And this is one of my favorite quotes from him is, I am a great believer in luck. I find that the harder I work, the more I have of it. And that's just kind of a sarcastic way of saying, if you work hard and train and you learn, you end up lucky. And he's sarcastically saying luck is not a thing. And I go back to Howard's class because I really like Howard. He's a good friend. But Howard mentioned in his class that we fall down to the level of our training. And that's basically what he's saying too, is work hard and you'll see the results. And that's what we're doing today by learning this fire science. So quick review of the fire behavior courses that we've had lately. Does anyone want to give a definition of what fire is? Because that's the very first thing to start is what are we fighting? What is our enemy? So Jose, do you want to pick someone?
Yeah, let me pick. Before I pick, I'll give 3 seconds to whoever wants to answer what fire is.
I can try.
Thanks, Errol. Go ahead, sir.
It's a chemical reaction where heat and I think I'm stuck.
Oh, no, you did it exactly.
Can I try?
You're good.
Yep.
Can I try?
Okay.
It is
Go ahead.
Yes, can I try? But it's Peter Warui from Nyandaro. I think fire is a chemical reaction where energy is a chemical reaction taking place between oxygen and source of energy, and there is the presence of heat.
Yep.
So I think there are 3 things in the definition. There is the source of heat, then the energy, the heat, the oxygen, and then the source of the burning object. That probably is the energy.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. The definition of fire, and it doesn't have to be perfect because no matter what textbook you read, they're a little bit different, but all of them say the same thing. Fire is a chemical reaction, and the result of the fire is intense heat and light. The methods of heat transfer are going to be important that we talk about during this class. You have convection, conduction, and radiation. Your convection is where you're heating up like the atmosphere immediately around you. The best example is convection type oven and convection cooking. Conduction is where you heat up an object, and as you're heating the object, the heat wants to disperse throughout that object, and that's conduction because the fire's touching that object. Radiation is going to be your biggest source of heat transfer in a fire. That's the one we try to stop the most as we're applying water, and which radiation cannot go through a solid object, but it can go through anything else. So it can go through water technically. But it's, I think 70% of your heat transfer is radiant heat. And it's like the sun, it's like the power behind the heat, and how the sun can burn even though it's millions of kilometers away. So we have two types of flame, and where, or how we define the type of flame is where is the oxygen at while the flame is going. A premixed flame, the oxygen and your fuel is mixed, and then it ignites later on. An example I have in here later is your stove, like a gas stove or those propane stoves, because the oxygen in the atmosphere is interacting with the propane coming to your stove, and then you light it. A diffusion flame, the oxygen is coming in from around the flame, and then the flame is already lit, but that the oxygen coming in from around allows the flame to grow faster. And what we're going to talk about these a little more in depth so that makes sense. Here's an example of a premixed flame. I'll leave this one on mute. Can you guys see the video still?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So what this experiment is doing is he's filling that glass tube of fuel and oxygen combination. And what we'll notice is the fire will start on the right and go to the left. This tube is open-ended. It's only closed on one end. So when he's going to shop the lights here so he can see the fire better, because it is such a perfect fuel mixture that it's going to be a blue flame. What I want you guys to look for, he's going to do this like 4 times, I think. The first time, you'll notice the flame is blue. It starts very thin on the right, and as it goes to the left, it gets thicker, and it's going to go fairly quick. Now, this first set of experiments he's doing, the first 2 or 3, he's adding less fuel and more oxygen. So we'll see how that interacts there. Then he'll do one where he has more fuel and less oxygen. It'll be about the same results, but it'll be a little bit faster, you'll see. So do you guys see that blue flame start on the right and go to the left? And as it went to the left, it got faster and bigger. And he'll do another. Right now, the fuel mixture is building up in that tube, and you can still see he has the ignition flame going on the right. That little orange dot on the right is your ignition source. So right now we're just waiting for that flammability range to become the perfect percent, so it takes off again. You can see that ignition flame getting a little bit bigger, so it's getting closer. Like every now and then it flares up. there goes the second one. So once again, it started at the right-hand side of your screen and worked its way to the left. And it was a fairly thin flame to start with. And it worked its way back into the fuel mixture. So he's pumping the fuel in from the right hand or the left hand side of the screen is where the fuel and oxygen's coming in. And what he did now, you just saw the other one go by the screen, is he increased the fuel ratio and decreased the oxygen. And that's why it happened faster, is because you had more fuel quicker, which put it into its flammability limits quicker. And that's why we see it happening faster with those last two. So I'll go back to my slides here. Oh, come on. There. What would happen if that tube was capped on both ends and he did that? We'd have the result would be an explosion. Here's the definition of the explosion: a sudden and rapid release of gases. Usually there's loud noise, shock, heat, the whole works. So if you have a pre-mixed flame, it can result in an explosion. It doesn't always result in explosions, but all your explosions are going to be a pre-mixed flame. What we would see if we watched a video like experiments on explosions, we'd see the same blue flame and it build up and then eventually release all that pressure and noise and heat. It's a very quick exothermic reaction. An exothermic reaction is a chemical reaction that produces heat. So this could be a wide range of things. If you're talking about like rust on a piece of tin or a car or something, that is an exothermic reaction. It's chemically reacting to change the composition of that metal. And it does produce heat, although very insignificant amount of heat. So then we work our way up to a fire. A fire is an exothermic reaction that produces heat and light and all that other stuff, and it's a chemical reaction. And then it goes to explosion. So all three of them are chemical reactions, exothermic reactions. They're just a varying degree of the intensity of an exothermic reaction. An endothermic reaction is where something gets all the heat from outside in. The best example of an endothermic reaction is an ice cube. If you put an ice cube on the table, it's going to melt. And that's because the ice cube is starting to absorb the heat from the outside. A deflagration and a detonation are two different terms used for explosions. And this isn't explosion. This is not an explosion class because we don't have time for that. But it basically talks about the flame front and how fast it's going, because that's going to impact how much of a explosion it is, how powerful it is. So once again, this is not an explosion class, but I'm talking about pre-mixed flames, and it's kind of important to learn about explosions so you know what a pre-mixed flame is. A low order or low yield explosion is kind of like if you look at a house or whatever structure that you're in, just imagine you have like a big guy like me and you kind of stand up and it like rips a coat because I'm so big, or like Shrek was in the house and he ripped, it just pushes the wall out, but overall the structure is still intact. It still resembles a structure at least. So this would show that we have low rate to pressurize. The structure might have been weak. I misspelled structurally apparently, but structure probably might have been weak before the event. So it allowed that pressure to escape faster. And it's just a method of classification of damage. If you talk to bomb disposal techs, low order or low yield explosions means that the bomb didn't explode fully. But for our purposes, a low order explosion is just how we're going to classify this explosion, because classifying it helps us to determine what was the factors of the explosion. I'm a big proponent of classifying and investigating every fire, every explosion, because when we learn why something happened, we can prevent it from happening in the future, and we prevent that property loss. And it's one of those things that's really difficult to be like, hey, I saved that house if that house was never on fire. But actually later on this year, it sounds like we're going to have a class that will kind of show you if your fire prevention program is truly being successful or not. And that'd be a very interesting class to take. And it should be one of these Wednesday ones, I think in September. So our next explosion would be the high order explosion or high yield explosion. This is different than a high explosive. A high explosive is just terminology for bomb techs to determine like what was the ingredients of the explosion. But we're going to have either really rapid pressure rate, or we're going to have a very strong structural compartment. And it's going to shatter or flatten whatever the explosion is. This is where you go up to a scene, you don't even realize there's a house there because it's just a bunch of whatever type, whatever 2x4s or concrete or whatever laying around. Once again, it's only a way to classify the damage, because when we start classifying the damage, we can look at what type of fuel and oxygen mixtures can give us that type of damage. So going back to our premix flame that we're studying, we would see that maybe natural gas at this ratio can be considered or can leave high order damage around. And an interesting thing that we can see that we don't see it all the time is we can have low order damage and high order damage at the same event. Maybe part of the structure was weak, so it blew out part of the structure and left the other one somewhat intact, but is still, we'd classify the intact one as low order, and then this one was high order, the ones that just shattered like this and debris everywhere. So that's a diffusion, or that is the premix flames. Now we're start talking about the diffusion flame. I have a video for the diffusion flame because I forgot to pick up food coloring. So this is just basic diffusion. If we put food coloring, into water, we can see that eventually, as the blue food coloring on the right is going down, it's circling back up and it's spreading evenly throughout the water. The red one on the left, they did the same thing. They started at the same time, but it's pretty well evened out by now. So this shows us a few different things about fire. So diffusion flame is a fire that is looking to grow and expand. And what it's doing by that is it's diffusing its heat onto other surfaces. It's doing it through radiation mostly, and it's doing it through the other types of heat transfer. And we can see just with this one variable in our water experiment that the rate of diffusion is greatly changed. So in a couple slides here, we're going to start talking about different rates of, or we're going to talk about heat release rates, I guess, and that will be one of the many variables that will determine how fast our fire will be spreading. So I'll go back to my slides here. So unlike pre-mixed flames, without a vent, your fire will be snuffed out. Going back to Rabbi Howard's class, is you need oxygen in order to have a flame. With the pre-mixed flames, your oxygen is mixed in before the flame. So you can have it in an enclosed compartment because there's still oxygen there. With a diffusion flame, it gets this oxygen from the outside, and if you have it in an enclosed compartment, it'll be snuffed out. What we see is sometimes it doesn't have enough oxygen, but it has enough just to kind of keep going. And then when we add oxygen to it, we end up with a backdraft situation, which is very hazardous for firefighters. So once again, to review how we solve a backdraft issue is we ventilate. You try to do it from the roof. Just get up as high as you can on the building structure and ventilate a hole. And then you'll add a bunch of oxygen. The fire will get a lot bigger before it gets smaller. But we'll switch over to my camera now. I have some candles with me here. My wife was nice enough to let me borrow candles. And we're going to talk about a few different things here with these candles. So I'll light the first one. And we can start seeing the flame growing. We can see that there's like no smoke involved here. It's just a nice vertical flame. One flame that's intact. We call this a laminar flame, much like laminar smoke. Remember how the laminar smoke was just a nice, gentle, steady color, steady stream of smoke? This, for the most part, is a steady color flame and a steady stream of flame. It's moving around a lot because my hand, when I put my hand there, it moves. So that is a laminar flame, much like the laminar smoke. This is a new candle, and you can start seeing this wick is going to curve in. Right now, how there's no blue on the flame tells me that there's no pre-mixed fire going on here. It's getting all of this oxygen from the outside of the flame. We're going to start melting the wax, and this candle is going to curve, or this wick is going to curve over a little bit. And then the fire turns to blue at the bottom. So what we'll have, because of how the wax is designed and how the wick is designed, is we'll have a premixed flame on the bottom, and then we'll have a diffusion flame on top. It's all the same. It's just literally the science behind making the wax to make sure we have the longest candle life and the smells and all that other stuff. Then this next one here, we got 3 wicks on it. Now this one's already burnt previously. So we can see that the flames aren't as tall. And I don't know if you can see in the video, but some of these flames are already having blue on the bottom a little bit. The blue is going to be very hard to see in a camera situation because it is a clean fire. And then I also brought this final candle here, and this one's a wood wick one. And when I lit it, you can see that there's a lot more smoke coming out. And when we go back to the Howard's class about fire behavior and reading smoke, we know that all this smoke coming off is incomplete combustion. And as a matter of fact, this yellow flame is also incomplete combustion. The flame colors are telling us how the fuel mixture with the oxygen is. This one's more of a turbulent flame because the wick has been burnt to the point where there's almost 4 wicks combining to create one. It'd still probably be considered a laminar flame, but it's a little bit more turbulent. If we go back to this first one so you can see it better. If I blow this first one out, let me readjust here. It creates a lot of smoke, but the smoke is still fire, or still fuel, I mean. So it can reignite. I'll let that warm up a little again. What we were concerned about this in our firefighting tactics is sometimes we just hit the fire quick, move on to the next part of the fire, but we don't cool down the area. And one of the reasons why we fight fire with water is because it is such an effective tool of cooling down the area too. So you might want to stay that little extra time to cool down the area before you move on to the next part of the fire. And that'll prevent rekindlings through smoke combustion there. So now that this is, this candle's warm again, I'll blow it out, I'll light it. It might be hard to see on a camera, but you can go on YouTube and find these videos too. But you'll see that I light the smoke and the fire travels from the smoke back down to the wick. So we got smoke. And it's really quick, but you can see the fire started here and went down to the wick. This was the one that was the brand new candle. And I don't know if you can see on the base of that, but we have a little bit of blue. And that little bit of blue flame. That blue flame is pre-mixed. So the oxygen is mixing with the wax, and it's creating a fire, which is sustaining this turbulent, or this it's laminar flame, but this diffusion flame up top. This would be a diffusion flame that's laminar. So another thing we can do to see where this fire is coming from, I have a strainer here. And I'm going to put the strainer on top of the candle. And what we'll see is the strainer will stop the fire because it cools the fire, because the strainer is cold compared to the fire anyways, it's room temperature. But going back to the diffusion flame, how it's trying to heat everything. Well, since the strainer isn't hot enough, it's going to stop the fire where the strainer is at. You'll have the fire below, but you won't have the fire above, unless I held the strainer in place long enough to heat up to the point where you'd have the fire in both, but that would take a while. So I put the strainer on top. There is no fire going through the strainer, but there is a fire below the strainer. And that is because the strainer is cooling it to the point where it didn't have enough heat to sustain fire above. Now we have a lot of smoke coming through the strainer now, and it's a blacker smoke. That would tell us there's more of an incomplete combustion process going on. And that smoke is fire still, or that smoke is a fuel still. So we would want to be careful of that in a fire situation. Another way of how we can tell where does the oxygen come in from is using this same strainer, we'll put it on top of the flame and we can look down and you can see that that flame is hollow. Why would that flame be hollow? The reason is it is getting its oxygen from the sides. 360 degrees around that flame, it is getting oxygen. But there's no oxygen in that center to sustain a fire. So we know that that's a diffusion flame because the fire is going before the oxygen is entering the chemical reaction. So I'll go back to my slides here. Thanks. So we kind of did the smoke and the soot experiments too. Once again, if you have a yellow or an orange or red type flame, that's going to create smoke and soot. And that smoke and soot is a fuel load. No, I guess I kind of, so going back to the flame color, your premix flame is going to be blue for the most part, like your stove or like that video that we saw earlier today. Because it's such a complete combustion process, it's not going to leave smoke or soot, and you won't have that extra fire load to worry about. But we saw the smoke and soot colors with these yellow flames of the candles and how that can impact our fire load. So now we're going to transfer to the heat release rate. I think we've all been to fires, and maybe we've been the guy to say, that fire was hot. And that's where we learn about heat release rate and temperature. Because hot is probably not the right word for it. If I look at, go back to my camera for this experiment. So I brought this 3-wick candle here, and I brought this 1-wick candle here. Which one would you think would be hotter? Most people would say this 3-wick one, because in theory it should be 3 times hotter. What we see though is the candles burn the same temperature no matter how many wicks you put in there. The temperature of that candle will be 12 to 1400 degrees, and I don't know what that is in Celsius. I apologize for that. But the amount of wicks doesn't change the temperature of the fire. In general, wood burns at like 1201 degrees, and gasoline or petrol burns at like 1200 degrees. But if you've ever been beside petrol that had caught on fire, you know it's a much more rapid event, and it feels much hotter, and it's a lot more chaotic than just wood burning. But they burn at the same degrees. What is different though is their heat release rate. So I'll go back to the slides and I'll try to hit the right buttons this time. So your heat release rate and your temperature is what's different. The temperature is the average amount of heat energy contained in a substance. We have a temperature in our bodies. That is the amount of energy we have, and that's contained within us, basically. Efficient machines have a lower temperature. Harder working machines use more energy and therefore have a higher temperature, and that's just machinery. So if you go to a tractor working in the field, it's going to run a higher temperature So they have to do extra engineering to make sure they keep it cooler. Whereas if you had a smaller car, it has a lower temperature. So they do less engineering to keep that engine cool. The heat release rate is the amount of that energy that is emitted from a burning object, and it's over a period of time. So with our 1 wick candle, we have a certain amount of energy, but over a period of time, this 3 wick candle is going to give us about 3 times the amount of energy over that period of time. That's why we would say the 3 wick is hotter, even though it's not. This is the formula to measure heat release rate. And I have an example on my phone, but it confuses this whole slide thing, so I probably won't do it. But just know that this formula is out there. For fire investigating, we need to know how does one object transfer to another object, and is that possible? So we'll go to this formula and we'll use the heat release rate formula to see if this couch that is on fire, does it have enough energy built up in it that it can start this chair that is 10 feet from it on fire. It's not as important. You don't have to memorize this formula by any means. You can always look it up online if you are interested. It is important to know that there is formulas to figure out these scenarios. And this is why. How does this impact your gear? The more energy released in the higher the heat release rate, the more your gear will be impacted. It's pretty obvious. So what we see in modern fires, you're going to have a higher heat release rate. So we need to make sure that we are improving our gear constantly to keep up with these heat release rates. If you ever been to a fire in a building that was under construction, those buildings have a very high heat release rate, usually because the surface to mass ratio is way off still, because they don't have the fire barriers put up or anything. So we need our gear to be able to withstand those events, because this is how you get burned. Like, this is the scientific reason why you get burned, even though you're wearing your gear. If that heat release rate is great enough to work through the gear, you're going to end up with being injured. And your weakest point of your gear, as far as heat release rate is concerned, is usually your face shield. If you have too great of a heat release rate, your face mask on your air respirators and SCBAs will start melting, and then you can get facial burns. And obviously that could lead to death pretty quickly. What's another thing that would impact how the heat release rate affects your gear is if your gear is clean and maintained. If you have dirty gear, or gear that's covered with oil and stuff like that, the heat release rate coming from these fires is going to be trapped within your gear, and it could cause injury that way. So we're going to make sure that our gear is keeping up with the current technologies as best we can. And we're also going to clean our gear to make sure we don't get burned. So thermal diffusivity, that's a hard word for me to say even, is defined as how quickly something reacts to the change of temperature. So basically, like, how quickly are you going to react to the change of temperature? It's similar to a diffusion flame. You can see diffusion or diffuse is kind of the root word of both the words, where the heat release rate is coming, it's warming up your turnout gear, and then your turnout gear is going to diffuse and warm you up a little bit. And I have a pretty good video where you'll see, up next, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Once again, this formula isn't one you have to memorize, but know that it is there. Because this, when you start looking at the formula, it starts talking about the fabric density and the heat capacities of the fabrics. So this is the formula that they're using to keep you guys safe while you're at a fire scene. You don't realize how much science is put into your gear alone to keep us safe. But they're pushing these formulas, and they're making sure that from a scientific and mathematical standpoint, that your gear is going to keep you safe. If you keep that gear maintained, it'll keep you safe. So let's watch this video, and what you'll see here is, if you start looking, this is at an instructors conference, and both these guys in the video are instructors, okay? What you'll see when he gets his thermal camera closer is the instructor on the right. His air line will be cool, even though he's in the fire. There, now he's getting closer to the fire. And then the instructor on the right, when he churns, you'll see that his shoulder is starting to turn colors. And that is because the heat release rate is impacting his gear and starting to diffuse throughout his gear. It makes more sense when there's sound, but that doesn't work. Okay, so now you see his airlines. His airlines are still cool. His air tank is still cool. But you can see on his right shoulder there how it's starting to be impacted by the heat release rate of that fire. So just remember that everyone comes home. That's how I always end my classes. The biggest thing is we need to stay safe so we can help others. You know, if we get burned and we're out of commission for a couple weeks trying to recover from our injuries, that puts our community at a weaker risk, and it also puts our fire crews at a weaker risk, because they have to do more work with less people, or the same amount of work with less people at least. Like I said, I know I kind of got scientific, especially towards the end, but I know you guys can handle it. You don't need to memorize the formulas. Just know that those formulas are out there, and that is how the fire is impacting you directly as a firefighter. Because we need to combat that heat release rate in order to put out the fire, or in order to stay safe. And knowing like the flame types will help us determine how to put out the fire or prevent future fires. So if we have any questions, I think we still got a couple minutes.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really enjoyed your teaching today. Just thank you so much for coming here and taking your time to teach us this today. After this training, I will be sending out your guys' certificates of attendance. Thank you guys so much. Last week was the first time that we've done it, so thank you for your guys' patience as I just worked out a few of the kinks that come along with starting something new. And so just give me some more patience this week, as I'm sure it'll run a little more smoothly. But next week, with the same link, the same registration link that you followed today, please come back, and we're going to have Krista Nelson teach about firefighter safety. But after that, I'll give the Zoom meeting over to Jose as he leads tea time, and you guys can ask any further questions that you might have.